We adore you, O Christ, and we praise you, because by your holy cross you have redeemed the world. My hope is to do something with you that I would call glimpses from the way of the cross. For now, all of Lent stretches before us. It is a tremendous season of grace. Our prayers and penance hold special meaning for us in these days because we know that if we let him, God will do something inside of us. And amidst all these practices and customs that make Lent meaningful for us, the way of the cross, I think, holds a special place in the Catholic heart. Why not turn our gaze again to the path moistened with the precious blood? Great saints, and certainly far greater priests and preachers than I, have set out to provide full meditations on all 14 stations on the way of the cross. That task is beyond me, and frankly, we haven't got the time. But I think we can manage something like glimpses along the path. Let's meet some of the figures of this great drama. Tonight, Pontius Pilate. Tomorrow, Simon of Cyrene and Veronica. And on the final night, you, me. I was eager to speak about the way of the cross because I owe very much to it. I spent the Lents of my childhood on a farm north of Hazleton. On Friday evenings, my parents would take us to church for the stations, and these evenings had a very deep impact upon me. Perhaps it's odd to drag children to the recitation of a brutal execution. I don't think we were even allowed to watch Rambo. But in the pew, and later holding the candles or the processional cross as a server, I met my Savior on the way of the cross. I was so drawn in by what was happening, and I think my faith was purified there of syrupy sentimentality. Already as a child, I knew that something very bad had happened. I had never been outside of North Dakota, but I knew that something had gone very wrong with us and with the world of which we were a part. It was not all my fault, but it was my fault too. It was not all my fault, but it was my fault too. But what I remember yet more was the resilience of Christ's love. He kept getting up. He kept going forward. He kept loving me. No matter what I had done, no matter what splinters on the cross were my own. And so I was drawn to him. The cry we mouth at the start of every station, we adore you, we praise you, by your holy cross you have redeemed the world. It was a wholesome cry in my young mind. Tender, hopeful, true. It is still true after all these years. The stations of the cross are not given to us only to remind us of the historical passion of Christ, but to show us what is happening now, what is happening to each one of us. Christ did not become man to live his own short life on this earth, unimaginable mercy though that would have been, but in order to live each of our lives. He did not choose his passion only to suffer in his human nature, tremendous though that would have been, but in order to suffer it in the suffering of each of his members through all ages until the end of time. He had come to reveal God to us, the face of the Father, and yet most of his earthly life was hidden. He was hidden in his mother's womb. He was hidden in Nazareth in Egypt. He was hidden often even during his public ministry when he would flee to a mountain to pray. Today he is hidden in the Blessed Sacrament. He is hidden in heaven. In his mystical body on earth, he is hidden. But on the way of the cross, he was not hidden. He was exposed, made public property to the whole of mankind. The last time he went up a mountain to pray, his voice rang out in heart-wrenching agony, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. He was stripped naked before all the world forever. And if our gaze penetrates through the blood and the horror of it all, we weep to see exposed to our naked eyes God himself. This is what he looks like. This is what love looks like. I think for us the stations always culminate in the 12th station. Jesus dies upon the cross. Well, it's the most important of the stations, but I'm not at all sure that it's the most terrible. Jesus was executed because he was condemned. And I wonder if the condemnation wasn't more horrible than the execution. Don't you think it might have been more offensive to the Father? The very first station opens with a thunderclap of moral atrocity. Jesus is condemned to death. And so we glimpse him now, standing there, Pontius Pilate. All of history has conspired against Pilate to make him the man who condemned to death the Son of God. Of all of us poor mortals, just he and the Virgin Mary are mentioned in the Creed. Mary brought God into this world, and Pilate sent him out of it, at least for 3 days. You would expect him to be remembered as one of the great villains of history, shoulder to shoulder with Nero and Genghis Khan, Stalin, Mao Zedong. But we really don't think of him that way, do we? He is a strange figure to us. Pilate doesn't have the bearing of a villain, does he? He is reluctant and confused. He tries to avoid a decision altogether, telling the chief priests twice that they should take Christ and judge him for themselves. He sends him off to Herod with the same intention. Pilate tries repeatedly to escape the situation and compromise, offering to release Barabbas, having Jesus scourged and showing him bloody and beaten to the crowds, hoping that they would show him then some pity. And he has a superstitious curiosity about him, troubled by his wife's bad dream, asking Jesus where he was from. He was frightened, even though he was a successful man. He had the trust of the emperor. He had thousands of men under his command. And yet the Hebrews, they were a hard people to govern. And so he called for a basin and washed his hands, sending Christ to die on Golgotha. We don't just think of him as washing his hands. We think of him as wringing his hands, not knowing what to do. And yet we see in him too the longing of every human heart. When Jesus speaks to him of truth, he says, "Truth? What is truth?" We want to know too. Every human heart. Every human heart. Yes, that's it. We're so sympathetic of Pilate because he reminds us of ourselves. We too are so often reluctant and confused. We look for a way out. We compromise. We're scared. We want to know the truth, but we're scared. And so we wash our hands. We can look past the terrible thing that Pilate did because he seems so human to us. And we tell ourselves the same thing 100 times a day. I'm only human. And we send Jesus away from us, out of our world, out of our lives, then we turn up the TV so we don't have to think about it.